Imagine this. You post a quick reaction to some big news event on your private social media, you put your phone down, you go to sleep.
Right.
And instead of waking up to, I don't know, a few likes or maybe some angry comments, you wake up to a police officer pounding on your front door.
Or a mob. A mob of hundreds of parents demanding you be fired before lunch.
It sounds like dystopian fiction, but I mean, for a growing number of Americans in late 2025, this is the new reality.
It's the new standard operating procedure.
Today, we're walking through the just, chaotic aftermath of the assassination of activist Charlie Kirk. We're unpacking a whole stack of sources, local Illinois newspapers, federal government press releases, even legal guidance for university professors.
And the picture they paint is intense.
It's a nationwide collision between free speech rights and school district policies.
And it's not just about people being mean on the internet. This is a fundamental shift in how we even define disruption in the digital age. We're talking federal investigations, military involvement.
And this legal concept that's being used like a weapon against teachers, the heckler's veto.
Exactly.
So our mission today, it isn't to debate the politics of the assassination itself. We want to understand the mechanisms of the fallout. We're looking at a system where educators were just being squeezed between their personal expression and their professional survival.
We need to look at the machinery, the machinery that kicks into gear when the outrage mob comes for someone's job.
So let's start with the spark. The assassination happened, and of course, people reacted online. But inside the school system, those reactions turned into, well, immediate professional hazards. The most high-profile case, right out of the gate, was Nancy Zettler.
Right, the school board president, District 300 in Algonquin, Illinois.
So I looked at the timeline of her posts. She goes on her private Facebook page and posts that her reaction to Kirk's death was karma. She actually finished the sentence with a pretty aggressive expletive.
Not subtle at all.
Not subtle. Later on, she tried to sort of walk it back, sharing a post about empathy. But by then, it was too late. The screenshots were already everywhere.
And once those screenshots are out, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. The community reaction was just explosive.
You had dozens of parents flooding the board meetings. They weren't just annoyed. They were calling the post disturbing.
And their argument was that, celebrating or mocking a murder, no matter your politics, that disqualifies you from leading a school district.
They wanted her gone. Immediately. But Zettler, she didn't fold. She dug in.
She refused to apologize.
And she claimed the whole thing was a manufactured disruption, basically arguing that these were like phony groups targeting her just because they hated her worldview.
And that phrase, manufactured disruption, that's really crucial here. That was her shield. But she wasn't the only one. If we look over at Barrington, Rhode Island, we see how this played out with an actual teacher.
Right, the social studies teacher who posted a TikTok. I watched the video. He says, "Bye, Charlie." And then he just launches into this whole comparison of Kirk to farmers who want socialist handouts.
He called the victim a piece of garbage and then pivoted to a debate about gun control.
Which is, a bold move for a public school teacher.
You have to remember, these teachers are technically public servants. The fallout in Barrington was massive. That school board meeting felt more like a town hall or even a trial.
Well, the transcripts from that meeting are fascinating. They show just how deep the divide is. You had one parent arguing it was a failure of basic humanity.
Saying a teacher glorifying violence has no business being around kids, which is, a standard conduct argument.
But then you had the counter argument. A student and another parent stood up and said, essentially, if you fire him, you chill the speech of everyone.
They argued that students shouldn't be shielded from the reality that adults express strong opinions.
It's the classic tension, right? Do we want teachers to be blank slates, or do we let them be actual people with opinions?
And then there was that third case in Buffalo Grove, the Spanish teacher, Carolyn Pinta.
Moms for Liberty went after her. She posted that she despised Kirk, but she did clarify she didn't want him dead.
The group didn't really care about the nuance, though. They encouraged parents to pull their children out of her class immediately.
And that specific action pulling kids out of class, that brings us to the legal reality. Can you actually get fired for what you say off the clock? Because I think most people assume the First Amendment protects them.
It protects you from the government, yes. But employment law for schools it's a lot trickier. The sources all highlight something called the disruption standard.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this right, the schools don't have to prove your opinion is wrong. They just have to prove that your opinion broke the school.
Precisely. If parents are pulling kids out of class or if the phones are ringing off the hook, the school can say, your speech has undermined our mission and disrupted operations.
So the content of the speech matters less than the chaos it causes. But see, this is where it gets so messy. Because in 2025, it is incredibly easy to create chaos if you have a big enough following online. If I don't like a teacher, and I can get 10,000 people to email the principal,
You've just created the disruption.
I've effectively manufactured the reason to fire them.
And you've just defined the heckler's veto.
Let's drill down on that.
Think of it like this. You're outsourcing your HR department to the internet. If an online mob creates enough noise, that's the heckling, they can effectively veto a teacher's employment.
Wow.
One of our legal sources argues that if schools fire teachers based on this, they are actually rewarding manufactured disruption. They're handing the keys to the school to whoever screams the loudest.
So how are districts even navigating this? Because if they fire the teacher, they get sued for free speech violations. If they keep the teacher, the parents revolt.
Well, Barrington took a more cautious approach. Instead of a knee-jerk firing, they hired an outside attorney, Matthew Oliverio, to do an impartial investigation.
Okay, that's interesting.
And we saw a really insightful point from a crisis management expert, Mary Kay Talbot. She talked about the policies themselves.
What about them?
She called them nebulous, just too vague. She pointed out that a lot of district policies are so liberal in their wording that there's too much room for interpretation. So even if a teacher's video is offensive, if it doesn't violate a specific written policy, firing him is a legal landmine.
So the schools are trapped. But here's the thing. This explosion over the assassination, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. The feds were already circling these school districts looking for ideological extremism long before the shooting.
That's the context for everything else.
To understand why the crackdown is so severe now, we have to look at what was happening in places like Evanston, Skokie just months before.
Right. We have sources on the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, the OCR.
They opened an investigation into Evanston, Skokie District 65 in May 2025. And this marks a huge pivot from the previous administration.
Oh, it's night and day. The Biden administration had largely dismissed these complaints about diversity programs. The Trump administration reopened them. And they came in heavy, explicitly threatening to cut funding to districts that they claim have become safe spaces for racial segregation.
And I want to be really clear about the allegations here because they are specific. This isn't just about general wokeness. They are looking at factual claims of segregation.
One of the key pieces of evidence they're looking at is the use of privilege walks.
Where they line up the staff and have them step forward or backward based on their racial privilege.
Yes, but it went further than that. The sources detail the use of affinity groups. These were meetings where staff were explicitly separated, one group for whites and another for individuals of color.
Which, I mean, under Title VI, that sounds a lot like old-fashioned segregation.
That is exactly the argument the feds are making. They also flagged curriculum materials. There was a specific allegation about a lesson that compared whiteness to a deal with the devil.
The deal with the devil? You mean literally?
Literally. The source describes imagery of a devil's tail and a contract. The lesson allegedly taught that whiteness is a construct that exists only to profit off people of color.
That is incredibly heavy imagery for a public school. I can see why the federal government would view that as creating a hostile environment.
And it wasn't an isolated incident. In Oswego District 308, a group called Defending Education used FOIA requests to pull documents.
Freedom of Information Act, right?
Right. And they found similar things. Racial affinity groups, training where participants were forced to rank their privilege.
So you have this pressure cooker. On one side, districts say they're doing equity work. On the other, parents and the federal government are calling it racial stereotyping and illegal segregation. And then the assassination happens.
And that's when the Department of War steps in.
Okay, let's pause on that term, Department of War.
Right. To be clear, the Pentagon hasn't officially changed its name, but one of our more critical sources refers to it that way to highlight just how aggressive the military has become in monitoring civilians.
And based on the arrest of Larry Bouchard, that description might feel pretty accurate to some people.
Larry Bouchard. This story really shows the escalation. He's a retired police officer in Tennessee.
A retired cop.
Yeah.
Not exactly your typical radical.
Not at all. He posted a meme. It was a dark joke mocking the morning of Charlie Kirk. It actually used a Donald Trump quote about getting over a school shooting, but flipped it to apply to Kirk.
That's so distasteful, maybe.
But for sure. But the local sheriff deemed it a threat. He didn't just knock on the door, he arrested Bushart. And here's the kicker. He was held on a $2 million bond.
$2 million for a Facebook post.
He sat in jail for 37 days.
37 days in jail for a meme. That is a massive escalation of police power. It raises serious First Amendment questions.
Eventually, the charges were dropped because legally it just wasn't a true threat. But the message had been sent. The Pentagon is actively monitoring the social media of civilian employees and military personnel.
The message being, don't celebrate or mock the assassination.
Exactly. It feels like the walls are closing in. You have the school board watching you, the parents watching you, and now the military.
But there's a fascinating paradox here. Sometimes, when the government gets too aggressive, it actually saves your job.
This is the government coercion defense. It sounds completely counterintuitive.
It really does.
So let's look at the case of the professor in South Dakota. He posted something calling Charlie Kirk a Nazi. The university fired him, mostly because the governor of South Dakota publicly demanded it.
You would think having the governor demand your firing would be the nail in the coffin.
You'd think so, but legally it was his saving grace. See, if a private employer fires you, that's business. But the university is a state entity. When a high-ranking official like a governor demands a firing, it completely transforms the issue.
It's no longer an HR dispute.
It's the state punishing a citizen for their speech.
So because the governor made it public and political, the professor's lawyer could argue his constitutional rights were violated.
Exactly. The judge agreed. The professor was reinstated specifically because the government overplayed its hand.
So the lesson is, if you're going to get fired, hope a politician tweets about it first.
Ironically, yes. It turns a simple employment issue into a constitutional crisis.
But for the average teacher, the one who doesn't get a governor's attention, the situation is grim. The American Association of University Professors, the AAUP, they aren't taking any chances.
No, their advice is stark. They're telling their members to lock down.
What does that even look like?
Scrub your accounts. Set everything to private. Don't post anything you wouldn't want on a billboard. They're warning everyone to just expect screenshots, to realize that private doesn't exist anymore.
That creates a massive chilling effect. Teachers are terrified to speak, or they feel like they are constantly walking on eggshells. Who is even left in the classroom?
That's the worry. We are seeing a collision between the need for orderly schools and the chaotic nature of internet speech. And right now, the definition of safety and disruption is being rewritten in real time.
By whoever can generate the most outrage.
Which brings us right back to that idea of the heckler's veto.
We're pivoting to a system where employment rights are decided by mob volume.
It is.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. If a school district's stability now relies on the silence of its staff outside the classroom, have we handed over the keys to the schoolhouse? Who is really in charge of your child's education? The principal or the person with the most followers on X?
It's a question every parent and taxpayer needs to be asking, because right now that line between private citizen and public servant has effectively vanished.
And once that line is gone, it is very, very hard to draw back. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Stay curious.
See you next time.